I know we will talk tonight about the stage of Mussorgsky's Boris Godunov at the Lyric Opera of Chicago. And first of all, thank you, Marina Vecchi. I don't know if she's here. Anyway, thank you for helping us in organizing this event. And before I forget, in case you haven't seen Boris Godunov yet at the Lyric Opera of Chicago, you can have a discount through the Institute for the last representations, so please inquire at the office for that. Apart from this, it is an enormous pleasure for me to introduce to you to the Italian-based Ferruccio Furlanetto as one of our panelists tonight. So it's very difficult to make Mr. Furlanetto's career short, but we have managed to our regret. So Mr. Furlanetto stars as Boris Godunov in this Lyric Opera of Chicago debut. It's the first time he's coming to Chicago at the opera. He has already been at the Chicago Symphony, as he was telling me a few seconds ago. So his main roles have been at the Met, have been the Faust, the Don Quixote at the Teatro Real in Madrid, Verdi's Attila at the San Francisco Opera. And he has been the first Italian to sing Boris at the St. Petersburg's Mariinsky Theatre, and he has played his role as well in many other places, such as La Scala in Milan, Vienna, Roma, Venice, Florence, and San Diego. We hope that the Slovakian tenor Stefan Margita will arrive sooner or later, so maybe Jess will read his biography if he arrives. Okay. And we have also Jess Rosenberg, the moderator of our discussion and a very good friend of the Institute. He has a PhD in historical musicology from the New York University and is currently teaching at the Northwestern University since 1998. He's a specialist in Italian opera and the author of numerous publications on 19th century Italian music by composers such as Rossini, Bellini, Donizetti, Verdi, Mascagni, and Martucci, basically all the most important ones. And his current research project involves the representation of Jewish identity on the Italian operatic stage from the 19th to the 20th century, which I'm very curious about. I hope you will come to talk about that one day or another. So for the moment, there will be a reception after the discussion, and I pass the microphone to Jess. Thank you.
Thank you. So it is a great pleasure to have you here in Chicago on the stage of the Lyric Opera, doing this role that has become something of a specialty for you, I imagine. And maybe I could just start by asking you something about Boris Godunov, because I was surprised to read in the interview published by the Lyric Opera that you don't think he was guilty. Boris Godunov is the Tsar of Russia. He is consumed by guilt, tortured by guilt for this terrible crime for which he is responsible. And yet it is kind of ambiguous. Most historians who look back at 16th century Russia don't think that he was guilty. And this is an opera based on a play by Pushkin, which, well, I always thought it came out pretty clearly that he was guilty. So I would love to know more about it, because it is key to understanding the character.
Why I like to think, first of all, since I had the opportunity to do already for 12 years this role, living this character under my own skin every night on stage, you start to be somehow the character. And I like to think that he didn't do it. He was, unfortunately for him, quite weak mentally. And you don't have to forget that there are not proof about this, but it seems that he was poisoned little by little. And this was provoking also this mental weakness and this general weakness of the character. He died suddenly after, they say by a stroke, after having drank the last glass of wine. So maybe it had substantious part of Boris. So he was surrounded by snakes. My colleague, who is absent, he is the best of them. And he made a big mistake to send to Uglic, the place where the Tsarevich was supposed to have been killed, to make an inquiry. As a commissioner, he sent Shuisky. So when Shuisky came back, he could mix up the story in the way he wanted. And Boris, unfortunately, was believing it. And gradually, inside himself, I like to think that he knew that he didn't do it. But if there were so many rumors about it, maybe there was some truth in some hidden part of his brain. So this is what makes this character also extremely interesting and beautiful to sing and to act, because it gives you the possibility to play constantly by contrast. You have the strong politician having a very violent fight with Shuisky. Just before you have the most devoted and in-love father that you can imagine, then you have this remorse that is biting his heart continuously and is leading him towards madness and death. I mean, there is such a universe of feelings going on in this man in 40 minutes of singing, because he's not more than that. So it's quite a demanding role, but it's such a beauty. It's such a privilege to be on stage, being this amazing character.
Well, I mentioned earlier that there is an important Italian connection with this opera, and I just wanted to go over a couple of historical bits. The first time this opera was given in the United States, it was conducted by Toscanini at the Metropolitan Opera in New York, and that was a performance in Italian. And believe it or not, that was typical. Most performances of Boris Godunov in the United States were given in Italian for a number of reasons, including the presence of important Italian basses who sang the role, Ezio Pinza and Cesare Siepi later on. We actually have some recordings. They don't do it like this anymore. Nowadays, of course, it's just taken for granted. If you're going to do this opera in Chicago, of course it will be in Russian. But I wanted to ask what kind of challenge you found in learning a role in Russian. Do you speak Russian? Is it one of the languages you've learned?
No, I didn't, but I did study a lot. You know, the first approach with the Russian text was for a big recital that I prepared in the first years of the 90s with Alexis Weissenberg. And we did a fantastic program that last year we also put in a CD, but with another pianist, because unfortunately Alexis is not anymore practicing. And it took me 2 good years of deep study to prepare this recital. And it was very important because when 5 or 6 years after I had the first offer for Boris, I was already into that length of wave, you know, and to learn Boris was something not so difficult. It took me, for this version, it took me, let's say, 4 months, but really going very quiet without pushing.